So this video is going to talk about a large part of Chapter 39. Now, I told you in the assignment, in the announcement there, to read all of Chapter 39. It's not a long chapter. And you should probably listen to this video first, actually, and then read it because you can kind of skim through parts of Chapter 39. Um, to begin to explain what's going on in Chapter 39. It's all about current issues in macroeconomic theory and policy. And it starts off with the question, what causes macro instability? Then it goes on to the question about, does the economy self-correct or not? And then it finishes with the question about, should there be a monetary rule or should we be going with a discretionary fiscal policy to manage the economy? You need some historical background here. So remember that back in the first semester, I told you that the science of economics got started with Adam Smith. So Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and David Ricardo are what we call the classical economists. Okay, and they developed a system of classical economics that dominated the field of political economy, is what they called it at the time, from 1776, which is when The Wealth of Nations was written by Adam Smith, into the 1930s. So right through the 1920s and into the crash of the 1930s, and in the initial attempts to deal with the crash, stock market crash and the economy, deep recession that occurred in 1929, classical economic theory was dominating. But in the in the 1890s, actually, as early as that, a guy named John Maynard Keynes was rethinking this whole thing and wrote a couple of things as early as the 1890s and early 1900s. And in 1930s, when the classical economic ideas were not rescuing us, pulling us out of the Great Depression, some people turned to the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, who said that there were some serious problems with the classical economic theory that the economy would always self-correct in a relatively short amount of time. Keynes recognized that there were factors that were inhibiting that self-correction, and without government action, that the Great Depression could go on and on and on and on, which it kind of did. But Keynes had thoughts about what government could do to rectify the situation. So with that background, nobody is a pure classical economist anymore. We have what we call neo-economic, or neoclassical thought, rather. And neoclassical thought breaks down into several different schools, among them the Monetarist school, which is the most important one, and one of the two primary schools in the United States today. RET means rational expectations theory. You're going to read a little bit about it in your book. It's just not a big deal to us right now. If you major in economics when you go to college, you'll learn a lot more about it. You'll deal with it a lot more. But for us, it's not a big deal. A guy named Milton Friedman is the prominent theorist who updated, if you will, classical economics into what we call monetarist macroeconomic theory nowadays. He worked at the University of Chicago, and his thought and the people that agreed with him and came to the University of Chicago to teach became known as the Chicago School of Economics, still a very influential group today. And actually, the rational expectations theory is kind of an offshoot from that. The core idea of classical economic theory and monetarist thinking is this thing right here, the equation of exchange. This is probably the most important concept you're going to get out of Chapter 39 that might be on the exam in 2 weeks here, is this idea of the equation of exchange, which we're going to come back to in just a minute, and I'm going to explain what you need to know about it. Over here, John Maynard Keynes. Today, there are probably no true Keynesian economists anymore. People have built on his ideas. They've recognized that it was a theory that needed a lot more work. And so we have kind of a neo-Keynesian thought. By the 1950s, Keynesian economics, Keynesian thought dominated almost all universities in the United States and in England. Um, and monetarism actually evolved as a reaction against Keynesian economics. And then, of course, those who were believers in government intervention in Keynesian economic theory worked harder to elaborate their ideas, and it became neo-Keynesian, or what we call mainstream economic thought. Today, in fact, somewhere along the line, I've forgotten who said it, there was this phrase that we are all Keynesians nowadays. Even those of us that were anti-Keynesian have agreed with a lot of what he has to say. Keynesian economic thought is focused on the basic macroeconomic equation that we learned way back in February, the GDP, the output of the nation. You could use capital Y here for the nation's income, is equal to consumption plus gross investment plus government spending plus net exports. And that's the basic central equation of mainstream or neo-Keynesian thought. All right. Now, this question, what causes macro instability? For the Keynesians, instability is right here. It's that investment spending. And I explained that to you back in February and early March before we went on hiatus here and went to online. If something new is out there and people are excited about new inventions, new computer technology, new communications technology, new manufacturing technology, and businessmen think they can make a buck on it, they're going to invest a lot. There's going to be a lot of borrowing. Investment spending is going to go way up. That's going to drive the GDP up because it's a component of GDP. People are going to get more income. Consumers are going to be spending more. And we're going to wind up probably with some inflation, but hopefully with economic growth too, so that both aggregate supply and aggregate demand are shifting to the right. But that exuberance of investment could cause a lot of inflation and instability. Of course, if a scare happens, wars are imminently going to break out, or coronavirus occurs, businessmen get scared, they pull their money out of their investments, investment spending drops tremendously, people lose their jobs, consumer spending starts going down because of job losses, and that is the cause of instability. To the neoclassical and the monetarists, instability is explained by this equation of exchange. So let me tell you what you need to know about the equation of exchange. The M stands for the money supply. So this is MS, or the money supply. V stands for velocity, or the number of times that the money is used over and over again. I've explained a little bit about velocity back in early March before we had to leave school. So MV means M times V, which would be the size of the money supply times the number of times that the money is used over and over again. That's got to equal the GDP, okay? On the right-hand side over here, P is the price level, or PL, as we have in our ADAS graph, and Q is the number of things that are bought and sold, that are created, that are manufactured and sold during the year, the quantity of goods and services. So price level times the quantity of goods and services should equal the GDP. So what we have here is this side should equal the GDP, and this side should equal the GDP. Okay, so it's a very simple, straightforward idea. Two different ways to calculate the GDP. They say that macroeconomic instability is caused right here by inappropriate monetary policy. When the Federal Reserve makes what in their mind is some kind of a mistake with the amount of money that they are creating, with open market operations or the reserve requirement or discount rates or whatever it might be. And when the money supply goes up, velocity, they argue, is relatively stable. And that's a really crucial thing. They say that velocity is relatively stable. Relatively stable. Now, relatively means that nobody argues that velocity is absolutely stable and it never changes. But the changes in velocity are predictable and they come about slowly. So we can figure that out. So when the money supply shoots up, this side of the equation has to shoot up. That's going to increase this side of the equation. This number is going to go up when the money supply goes up. So either the number of things we have available to buy have to go up. So if this goes up by, let's say, 5%, and the quantity of things that we have to buy goes up by 5%, then, and velocity is stable, then the price level will be stable. But if the quantity of things that we have available in manufacturing doesn't go up by that same percentage, then the price level has to go up. Okay, and that's what causes inflation or deflation. When, in fact, the monetarist critique explanation of the Great Depression is that the Federal Reserve did not supply enough money in the 1920s, the late 1920s, to support the growth of the economy. And it was the lack of liquidity, the lack of money that caused the quantity and price level to start to drop and spiraled into the Great Depression. So macro instability is the cause of it is inappropriate monetary policy for the monetarists, classical people, neoclassical people, and swings in investment spending is the cause of instability over here. Also, they talk about supply shocks and demand shocks, and those things impact investment spending. So those things are the cause of instability. Now, will the economy self-correct? That's going to be my next video here because I want to keep these shorter. So the next one will talk about self-correction of the economy and what kind of monetary policy should we be talking about.